I love the last line of the hymn that the choir sang. No more a stranger nor a guest, but like a child at home. I think that's what church ought to be, don't you think? It's the kind of church God is making of us, so that when we come to this place, that's how we feel. Well, this Sunday, salt and light, being different for Jesus' sake in the kingdoms. In a paraphrase of Jesus' saying, Southern novelist Flannery O'Connor once wrote, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you odd." The last thing I wanted to be growing up in Charlotte was to be odd, was to be different. I wanted to fit in. I wanted to wear what my friends wore, Weegian loafers and Gant button-down shirts. I cut my hair to look like everybody else's hair. Finally, today, at this point in my life, these words by E.E. Cummings ring true. To be nobody but yourself in a world that is doing its best night and day to make you everybody else means to fight the hardest battle anyone can fight and never stop fighting. That applies to churches too. In today's text, Jesus is talking about being the right kind of different for Jesus' sake in the kingdoms. The first image is salt. You are the salt of the earth. What are the qualities of salt that make the world better? Well, salt brings out the flavor of food, right? And salt preserves food, and salt heals. Ever gargled warm salt water? Isaac Denison, the novelist, wrote, "The cure for anything is salt water, tears, sweat, or the sea." Salt in itself is not worth much. Its worth is what it brings to the world, how it brings out its flavor, how it preserves, how it heals. So the church itself is most truly the church when it carries on its mission out in the world. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, awaiting execution by Hitler in prison, wrote these words: "The true church is her true self only when she exists for others." The true church is only the true church when she exists for others, not dominating, he said, but helping and serving. Once in history, I read that salt was so valuable it was used as currency, as money. The church finds its true value then as it is willing to be salt of the earth, offering itself to the world. Some churches I know are on a low salt diet. Quaker Elton Trueblood said once, "The American church has been inoculated with a tiny dose of Christianity, so the real thing won't take." Other churches are salt shakers full of salt, but the holes are plugged up. So we need to take the cap off, unplug the holes, so we can be useful again to the world. We are salt for the world, not for ourselves. Just a pinch will do, right? It doesn't take much to bring out the goodness, to preserve the food, to heal what needs healing. Now we turn to the second image, light. You are the light of the world. Are. So don't hide it under a bushel, he said. In Jesus' day, most families lived in a one-room home. So when night came, one candle was used and it would light up the whole room. Have you ever noticed what difference a small, one single candle can make in a darkened room? Well, you can be that too. The second image is of a city on a hill. A city on a hill cannot be hid. So don't turn out the lights. God has placed you in this world to be seen. The prophet Isaiah offered these words of God to Israel. I will give you as a light to the nations, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. So God gives us as a light to the world. This is our mission, to be a light to a darkened world, to show forth the beauty of God and the beauty of the world. So don't spend your time cursing the darkness. Light a candle. Anybody can curse the darkness. Light a candle. Think about this. Both salt and light are quiet witnesses, silent witnesses. They don't make a lot of noise. They don't shout, "Look at me." They just go quietly about who they are. And what a difference it makes. As St. Francis once said, preach the gospel everywhere. If necessary, use words. Now let's return to the theme, being different for Jesus' sake in the kingdoms. I've always trusted more in moral minorities than in moral majorities. Moral majorities can get too full of themselves and try to push their weight around. It is often the moral minority offering its minority witness that makes a difference in the world. Martin Luther King Jr. said that the vitality of religion is often found at the edges, at the margins of the religion, not at its safe center. Another way to say it is that you can make a difference if you are willing to be different. The Franciscan movement is an example. Richard Rohr, the Franciscan spiritual writer that some of you love, writes about the quiet and important witness the Franciscans have been as a minority movement in the Roman Catholic Church. He says that they have been a sort of parachurch on the edge of the inside of the organized church. St. Francis was, of course, the leader. His starting place was not human sin, but human suffering, and that God was with us in that suffering. They focused on the incarnation of Christ, God making God self-human, as the heart of salvation rather than the cross of Christ. They emphasize that it's how you live your life more than what you believe that's the most important thing. As Rohr said, humans tend to live their way into a new way of thinking more than think their way into a new way of living. And they made their witness quietly, not argumentatively. They refused to use what Rohr calls oppositional energy. Let's think about that phrase, oppositional energy. That is, trying to change others by being opposed to them. It's so easy in our pursuit of the good to use oppositional energy. There have been other movements in Christian history that have been minority groups, minority witness. Benedictines, for example, the monastic movement of Benedictines. Early Baptists, that is, before they wanted to be a moral majority. Quakers, Celtic Christians, they weren't different for difference's sake. They didn't take being different as a point of pride. They just simply witnessed to the truth and light that they had been given. In his letter to the Romans, Paul wrote these important words: "Be not conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of your minds, so that you may prove what is the will of God, what is good, and what is acceptable, and what is perfect." I've always loved J.B. Phillips' translation of this verse. Don't let the world around you squeeze you into its mold, but let God remold your minds from within. Do you ever feel like the world is squeezing you into its own mold? Well, our minds can be renewed from within. This happens to the church too. We become what some have called culture Christianity. A church shaped more by the world, the culture around it, than by Jesus. Carlyle Marney once quipped that Southern Baptists were more Southern than Baptist and more Baptist than Christian. I, by the way, think that was true about Southern Methodists and Presbyterians too. Churches in the South used the Bible to justify slavery. They even made little slavery Bibles to give to slaves with all the right verses. The German Christians fell under the spell of Hitler and Nazism, culture Christianity. When I was a student at Stetson University, a Baptist university in Florida, the night I was walking by the dorms the night that Martin Luther King was assassinated, and I heard cheers coming from the students' rooms. My stomach kind of flipped over. Culture Christianity. I believe that Grace is being called, has been called by God to be a different kind of church, a minority witness in the community and the world. Not as a point of pride, but as a sign of our desire to follow where Christ is leading us. Not to say, look at me, look at us, but to say, look at Christ, look at what God is up to in this world. It's okay then to be a minority witness in the American church. We should take Jesus' words and be heartened by them, his words in Luke to his tiny band of followers. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom. To give you the kingdom. Our culture says bigger is better. I know that. I've lived in Texas. Grady Nutt used to quip that Texans don't lie, they just remember big. Jesus does not call us to be successful. That is, success is defined by the world around us, but to be faithful. There's a rabbinic version of the story of Jonah that I love. The old rabbis used to retell, rearrange biblical stories in order to make a point. In this rabbinic version, Jonah goes to Nineveh to preach repentance, hoping they will change and be rescued, be saved. Well, he preached and no one listened. And some began to mock him as he went through the streets preaching. One day a boy came to him and said, "Why do you day after day, year after year, go through the streets preaching when nobody listens and people are making fun of you? Do you hope that Nineveh will change?" Jonah replied, "I preached at first to change Nineveh. Now I preach so Nineveh won't change me." Our first calling is to be who Christ is calling us to be, then leave the outcomes into the hands of God. So the question is, do we have the courage to be different in our conformist society? If so, then how to be different? Different for Jesus' sake in the Gospels. To become who we are rather than who the world wants us to be. It may take a little shaking. I have a flashlight that somebody gave me. This is an object lesson. Sue taught me how to work it this week. If you shake it, then the light comes on. So we need sometimes to be a little shaken for the light to come on. I think the whole Sermon on the Mount is about describing what it means to be salt and light in the world. So let's quickly go through the Sermon on the Mount, starting with the Beatitudes. Be poor in spirit, knowing your need of God. Weep with the weeping of the world. Hunger for justice and righteousness, and stand with those who are starving for justice and righteousness. Be full of mercy. Be pure in heart, that is, wanting more than anything to be who God has made and calling you to be. Be peacemakers in a war-filled world. Is that different enough? Then Jesus gets very personal and asks, will you watch your anger and be willing to reconcile? Will you tell the truth and keep promises? Will you refrain from vengeance and returning what is evil for what is evil? Will you love not just your own, your family, not just your neighbor, but your enemy, and pray for them? Will you quiet your judgmental mind? Will you trust God to care for you and let go of your daily worry? Will you be willing to enter by the narrow gate to take the road less traveled for Jesus' sake and the Gospels? If so, you will not be trying to be different. You will be different. You will be salt and you will be light to the world. The final words of Jesus may raise a tiny little question. Let your light so shine before others that they will see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Yes, but didn't Jesus say just a few little verses down not to practice your piety in public and not to parade your good works? Didn't he say keep it hid? Well, yes, he did. But it's all in the motive, in where we point. If we do these things, Jesus said, in order to be seen and praised by others, keep it hid. We don't point to ourselves saying, look at us. We point to Christ and say, look at Him. You are the salt of the earth. You are Christ's light. Let it shine. Clarence Jordan was a Southern Baptist Greek scholar who left the classroom to move back to Georgia and form the first interracial community in Georgia. It raised a ruckus. He was thrown out of his Baptist church, he and his wife. But he wrote this wonderful translation of the New Testament called the Cotton Patch Version. Have any of you read the Cotton Patch Version? It's in Southern vernacular. But we'll listen to how he translated this last verse. Let your light so shine before others that they will see your lovely ways and give praise to your Father in heaven. Lovely ways, not good works, but lovely ways. It's the same words, by the way, that describe what the woman did when she anointed Jesus' feet with her perfume. Lovely ways. It is the way of love, isn't it? Everything is the way of love. So go out there and be the light of love in the world. I close with Wendell Berry's poem. It is, in fact, a prayer, and it is, I think, our calling. He wrote, "I know that I have life only insofar as I have love. I have no love except it come from Thee. Help me, please, to carry this candle against the wind."